Good morning, everybody. Was it moved into the afternoon? Thank you all for coming. It's incredible to have an attendance of this magnitude, and it shows the support that the club enjoys. May I particularly welcome also the Deputy Mayor, Mr. Stephen Pound MP, and Councillors Rogers and Murray, together with our principal guests, Mike Borelli and Simon Hughes. We much appreciate your devoting your time to mark this occasion, which is special to us. Mike really hardly needs an introduction, but is credited as being England's most outstanding captain, as well as for Cambridge and Middlesex. He was president of the MCC in our centenary year and chaired the World Cricket Committee for 8 years. An incredible record of achievement. Simon, who started at Ealing, had a very successful career with Middlesex and has continued that as an author, TV commentator, principally known as The Analyst, a journalist and now editor of The Cricketer. Thank you both for making the time. Brentham Cricket Club is 110 years old, and in that time there have only been 2 pavilions. In fact, Mike and I are 2 of the very few who can probably remember the first pavilion that was burnt down in 1958. Whilst the main objective is focused on the pavilion, we are using the occasion for 2 other items, and we thought it appropriate to carry those out first. We want to honour and remember 2 of our members who played a significant part in our recent history and had their lives cut short. We have created a memorial garden by the flagpole, and 2 commemorative roses are to be planted. The first is in memory of Roger Kingdon, an outstanding batsman, captain and central figure in the club. He toured Australia with a club cricket conference and played regularly for the Middlesex County League. His role in Middlesex club cricket was significant, even though his career was cut short by an aneurysm at the age of 30. The second is in memory of James Pettifer, whose life came to a sudden and tragic end at the age of 31. He was not an outstanding cricketer, but nevertheless central to the club and a very important figure. He was much loved by all. He had the reputation of playing the game as it should be and was insistent on that. What better memory of someone is there than that? His parents, Charlie and Loretta, will carry out the planting of the rose, and Tony Williams will plant one for Roger. So if we could proceed to the flagpole and carry out the planting.
You didn't tell us about that.
No. The roses are over there.
No,
It's Charlie. We have planned to carry out this action for some time now, and it's rather nice. We've got a suitable occasion to show all that has been put into it. Moving on, when the second additional item takes us back almost the days of the original Pavilion, namely 1961. There'll be quite a few here who don't understand that date, but the others who do. I would ask the Secretary of the Club Cricket Conference, Charlie Puckett, to relate the circumstances.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to give you a brief piece of information about the conference. This involves Mike. In 1978, we had our first annual lunch to raise funds for the tour, and Mike was leading a rather less known team to Australia for a thing called the Ashes. And during the course of his speech, he made one comment that's always stuck in my memory for some reason. And he said we had an advantage over England because we took our cheats with us. Well, on that tour, we won 19 and lost 2, and I have to tell you, I didn't umpire either of the 2 defeats. I was with on the tour with Roger Kingdom, and that meant I was also not the most pleasing member of the tour party. Before that, in 1975, Alan Holly was on that tour, and prior to that, Brian Reid was on the 71. However, the important bit is in 1961, the Club Cricket Conference on the 6th of July at Blackheath played Australia, and we beat them. We didn't just beat them, we thrashed them by 8 wickets. And Wisden that year, or the following year, records that the Australian playing record was played 37, won 14, lost 20, drew 21, lost 2. And the 2 defeats recorded were England and the Club Cricket Conference. The Club Cricket Conference annual report reads, and it's very short, you'll be pleased to know, rain prevented a start before 1:45, and the Australians, playing light-hearted cricket, soon found the bowling of a higher quality than they had perhaps expected. They lost 5 wickets for 78 before Benno and Grout stemmed the collapse, but the side was all out in 2 1/4 hours. Melville of Blackheath took 6 for 46, Griffiths of Beddington 2 for 18. Going in after tea, Whitcomb of Brentwood and Day of Hornsey shared an opening stand of 82 in under an hour, that day's contribution being 37. Whitcomb went on to make 71, the second wicket falling at 138. John Swan of Brentham and Brian Gibbons of Wimbledon, with undefeated innings of 38 and 5 respectively, hit off the remaining runs. Sadly, for the purposes of this, it was Brian Gibbons who hit the winning runs, to give the conference a win by 8 wickets 2 minutes before time. For any young cricketers here, those were the days when you bowled a sufficient over of 8 that you didn't need any number of overs in the last hour. Now, I'm sure the Sydney Morning Herald probably put something similar to that in their report, but I haven't been able to find it. Sadly, we, for some reason, goodness knows why, the conference did not cap 3 members of that team. Joe Misso, Alan Hurd of Sevenoaks Vine, and John Price, who went on, of course, to play for England. We capped them last year, and which then causes a bit of a silly situation because we started giving regnal numbers to our players. So John Swan, who was capped, is number 23, and Joe Misso, who wasn't capped, is now 255. So I would like, please, Mike, to present to the families of both Joe Misso and John Swan their new look Club Cricket Conference caps, and I'm sorry about the hairs on there, that's the cap. And that's John Misso. Thank you very much.
Well, it's nice to put something right after, how long, 50, 60 years? Anyway, these caps are to be treasured. It would not be a Brentham occasion if mention wasn't made of Ivor Chaplin, our scorer. Ivor has completed 50 years with the first 11 and 53 years with the club overall. More personally, last season he reached the milestone of 2,000 matches for the first 11. But if that is not extraordinary enough, he did them all consecutively. He has not missed a match in 50 years. We marked this achievement last year on the actual occasion by presenting him with a trophy, but we have now had a portrait painted of him, which appropriately we have hung in the pavilion. I hope you like it, Ivor. Turning back to the main purpose of the occasion, as I said earlier, there have only been two pavilions in the history of the club. This one is not a completely new pavilion, but partly new, and with the second pavilion partly reshaped and refurbished. We would have liked a new one altogether, but the reality of cost and the funds necessary came to the fore. We did, however, manage to emphasise it is a cricket pavilion, and you will no doubt spot the built-in cricket ball. What we are unveiling today is an investment in the future, and an attempt, and hopefully a successful attempt, to create for future generations. After all, we have provided a programme for over 100 colts each year for many years, and maybe we will not have to wait for 60 years before we get an updated pavilion and for the next generations after that. Some 25 years ago, we just had the brick pavilion, which was somewhat utilitarian, shall we say, and we erected a conservatory to provide some covered seating from which cricket could be watched, particularly in inclement weather. It had, however, deteriorated to the point that it was about to fall down and had to be propped up. This led to this project. We had to replace the conservatory and decided it was an opportunity to upgrade the 60-year-old element, which we had lived with for so long. We needed to provide disabled access and a toilet for both females and the disabled. The central corridor therefore had to be widened. A kitchenette, a separate dressing room for the umpires, and an extended storage room for Colts equipment were included. That meant space had to be taken from the existing dressing rooms. This was replaced by extending the building forward on either side of the central conservatory area to ensure the dressing rooms were of a suitable size. It also enabled the plumbing and the electrics to be modernised, which was a great relief to one and all. For all this to happen, it has involved lots of contributions. The first was by John Grantham, a Colts parent, who, on hearing what was to be attempted, offered his professional services as a planner without charge to mastermind the original plans and see us through planning and conservation issues that came with being in the Brentham Garden Village. That was a brilliant start, successfully achieved, and we are most grateful to John. None of this could have happened without the support of funders. We were, however, ably assisted in this quest by Katie Berry of the Middlesex Cricket Board, so many thanks to her for putting up with all the queries and pressures we applied. Sport England were the first to award us a grant, and the largest one, and that opened the way forward. Shortly afterwards, Suez Communications agreed to supporting a grant mainly to deal with the refurbishment of the existing building. We had been made aware prior to that the Roger Kingdom Fund would also be prepared to provide the seed corn, so we were confident that we could move forward. The clincher was the support from the ECB through the very patient services of Chris Whitaker, who also agreed a grant that removed any financial hesitations that existed. So a heartfelt thanks to all the funders, and we look forward to their assistance being amply rewarded by the players of today and the youngsters of tomorrow. We could not and did not carry out this project without professional help. Our thanks go to our quantity surveyor, Martin Sheffield, believe it or not, an Ealing member, Richard Powell, our structural engineer, and I believe once a Perivale man, and Steve Clark, the project manager. They all had a great deal to put up with and were very supportive. Last but not least, our thanks goes to John Vincent, the contractor, not just for the job that he has done, but for his patience. The start was much delayed so that works were carried out in the season rather than as it should have been in the winter, as planned. We have to thank John for doing all he could to ensure that there was safe availability of the cricket pavilion during construction and having the club's interest at heart. Finally, the club's and my personal thanks goes to Harris Lambie, who has been instrumental in the whole project from start to finish, and without whom it would not have been achieved. Believe me, he has taken a goodly chunk out of his retirement years. Before I conclude, I would like to thank everyone who has supported the engraved bricks proposal. It underlines the support, the ballast as I like to think of it, the club enjoys, and would be much poorer without it. This is typified, shall we say, by the Jameses coming down from Yorkshire for this occasion. Durrell West has driven up from Plymouth this morning to produce microphones, etc. And John Gregg has come from Weymouth, wherever that is. So thank you all for making the effort and coming and supporting what is an important moment in the history of the club. I'm sorry to have gone on so long, but there was a lot of ground to cover, and if you'll excuse the pun, I would like to thank the groundsman for the condition the grounds are in. It is an absolute picture, and bearing in mind the weather we've had, it's quite an achievement. So that's the hard bit done. I would now ask Mike, who started his playing days in the first pavilion, if we'd now open this one for future generations.
Thank you, David. As you say, it looks absolutely beautiful. We've even had a green woodpecker laughing away in the background. And I thought that probably I came here first in 1945. My family moved back to Brentham Way in that year from Portsmouth, where my father, Horace, was in the Navy. And we came here, and he must have played in 45, certainly in 46. He scored 50 against Ealing on the day that my younger sister was born, 28th of July 1946. Those were unreconstructed days. My mother used to bring tea down there, and we had it matches for decades after that. Occasionally I'd go to the clubhouse when I started to play, and I remember in the clubhouse, the only place in the world that I've ever had lettuce and sugar sandwiches. Have you ever had lettuce and sugar sandwiches? If you'll forgive me a little bit, talk about one or two of the people who were my heroes when I first came. First of all, my father, Horace, of course, played for Middlesex a couple of times, and Middlesex seconds, and for Yorkshire once before the war, and always supported my cricket hugely. When we went to walks to the so-called uphill park, we'd always take a tennis ball, but I would be down the road, and so if I missed the ball, I'd have to go and fetch it from the bottom of the road. And when we played cricket on Bognor Beach, he would bowl with the wind, and I would bat against it. But he was of course, a great role model for me. John and Paul Swan, I'll come back to them in a minute. Frank Arl, who I realised only from just now from reading in Wikipedia, was from South Africa, played for Worcestershire, a medium fast bowler, I think. Bob Felton, an all-rounder, played for Middlesex as well. Used to hit the ball over that side screen into those allotments every now and again. Quite a big hitter, medium fast bowler. Later on, Davids, Vincent and Bloomfield, the Bryans, Waters, Reed and Mead, Roy James and Michael, Eb Schneerson, some of you might remember, Ken Kettle and Mickey Dyson, Paul Hooper, Graham Barlow, all figures that signified to me playing for Brentham. And of course there were the local derbies against Ealing, Eddie Ingram, my father used to talk about, and I think it was J.B. Thompson. Would anyone know that name? I think he swung it both ways. And then later on, Alan Price, Bob Fisher, John Lindley, and of course Simon here. Very good of Simon to come along. Other clubs like people like Doug and Henry Malcolm, Doug Newman, Ian Bedford, Mike Murray of Beddington, Malden Wanderers, and I remember playing here in the club match. Do you still have a club day at the end of September? We used to have a club day when everyone played, and I remember when I was about 11 or 12 fielding here, lots of people here, dropping a sitter at long leg and feeling very embarrassed. And another thing I remember is taking my kit in the back of the car when I was about 11 or 12, and we went to Malden Wanderers once, and we were one short, so I was allowed to play. And as it happened, I went to number 11, and we had to defend, to stay in the last 20 minutes or half an hour to save the match. And they had a leg spinner who played for Kent Seconds, and a chap called Harry Edney, who came in like this, bowled medium fast, and I stayed in, and I learnt some years later that they felt a bit offended that they couldn't bowl bouncers at this little boy who came in at number 11. Lensbury was another place that was nice to play at, the Bank of England, because they had table tennis table and a billiards table you could play after the game. But I just wanted to mention, to select out of all those people, just two people. John Swan, Paul as well actually, because Paul used to be the goalkeeper of the football team over there, and my father played and John played and Paul was a goalie, and I used to go and talk to Paul behind the goal, and he was very kind to me, and then suddenly the players would come sort of searing down towards the goal, and you'd have to pay attention to that. But John was my real hero as a batsman. He was a beautiful, elegant left-handed player, sideways on. He played a shot that my father used to call a professional shot, which was off the back foot, wide of mid-on, and tucking it away for 2 or 1. And he was always dapper, collar up. He was always, if he was called for a run, he'd always go for the run as hard as he could. He never complained about a decision. He was a gentleman and he picked the seam, I've discovered today. And the other person, and he could have played for Middlesex, but in those days in particular, perhaps now still, you had to take quite a gamble to play as a professional cricketer. In those days, it was a 6-month contract or 5 months contract. You might get injured, you might get dropped, anything could happen. You'd lose your job in the winter, and John couldn't afford to take that risk. But I'm sure he could have made a first-class cricketer. And the other is Brian Reid, and I would think of him as something like the Mike Hendrick of league cricket. And I'm told he's still got the record of wickets taken in the Middlesex League, despite the league only starting when you were 34. And I remember batting against you here on a slightly damp pitch. I don't remember how that happened, but I did, and probably in the late 60s. And I managed to stay in for about an hour against you with a new ball, but I couldn't score a run. And I remember it was just like playing against the top bowlers of that time. So I thought Brian was another one who could undoubtedly have made a career as a professional cricketer. And it's one of the things I liked about the league when it started was that it brought a little bit closer the links between club cricket and professional cricket. I mean, in Australia they have that great thing of grade cricket. Here we had always full-time for 6 months professional cricketers, and you couldn't have that link really. In Australia they could, and it's one of the great strengths of their cricket, I thought. So, congratulations on doing the Pavilion, David, and everyone involved. I'm told that the home pavilion is going to be named after Brian, the home dressing room, Brian Reid dressing room, and the away one after James Pettifer, and the pavilion itself in honour of Roger Kingdom. Do you have some scissors? See them? On the other side? Oh, I see. So
Well, Michael, thank you for all that and for making this the day that it has become. Simon would now like to say a few words.
Thank you. I'd just like to say it's a great privilege to be here today for me, because you know all about the great sporting rivalries in the world. Obviously Celtic against Rangers, Manchester United against Manchester City, Arsenal v Spurs was one I was always interested in because as a Spurs fan. But I never realised actually until I started playing cricket that Brentham v Ealing was a really cutthroat, ruthless local derby. And it just was one of those things, you know, local bragging rights in the borough of Ealing if you could beat Brentham. So these games here were really needle matches between Ealing and Brentham. I'm sure they still are. The importance of the Pavilion is something actually which is often underestimated, and one of those needle matches was a game in which Brian was playing obviously for Brentham and I was playing for Ealing, and I fancied myself a bit as a fast bowler, and I fancied getting a few cheap wickets against some Brentham players, thinking, well, they're only club players, and I got a couple of early wickets. But it was a wet day, actually a bit like this. It was a wet wicket that had been suffering from some quite bad rain for a few weeks before. And Brian came in at number 8, and I thought, well, you know, I'll have him easy. You know, looks a bit old. I'll have him for breakfast. And I just bowled a bit too short. I fancied myself a bit of getting him out off a bounce. Certainly, it was a slow pitch. The ball stuck in the pitch a bit, and he slogged me into Corfton Road about 4 times. 4 massive sixes, and I just felt absolutely terrible and mortified. I also realised how intense these Ealing v Brentham battles were. And the great thing was, Brian sort of swaggered off with about 40 not out to his name and had given Brentham a much bigger score than they should have got on that pitch, and then bowled brilliantly afterwards, and I think we lost the game. But the amazing thing was, I was there in the bar afterwards in the Ealing Pavilion feeling absolutely humiliated, and the first thing that Brian did, having really stared at me and said, right, I'm having you for breakfast on the field, but off the field, he was the first person who said, right, come and have a beer and we'll talk about this. And so we were able to exchange ideas about the game, and he was able to give me some advice in a very polite and valuable way. And I just think that, you know, pavilions are such an important aspect of any cricket, because you can talk about the game afterwards. Even though it's real needle battles on the field, you can really learn so much about the game by talking about it afterwards. And I learned a huge amount from Brian, and then went on to play for Middlesex. One of the things I always wanted to do, playing for Middlesex and playing professional cricket, was give someone my autograph. I just thought that was the sort of bee's knees. Obviously nowadays the autograph is the selfie, but in those days it was, you know, the autograph. It made you feel as if you were someone, if someone came and asked for your autograph. And in one of my first matches, playing with Mike here for Middlesex against Somerset, lots of kids ran onto the field at the end of the game, and there was me, having played 3 games, and there was Mike, the England captain, and there was Ian Botham, who'd been batting for Somerset, of course, a big figure as well. And this little boy of about 11, so one of these guys here, ran up to the 3 of us, and he said to Mr. Brearley, can I have your autograph? So Mike, you know, signed his name beautifully. And then he said, Mr. Botham, can I have your autograph? So Ian Botham signed his name. And then this kid looked at me and he said, sign here, mate. And he gave me his autograph book and a pencil, and so I signed my name, an autograph I've been practicing for months, big flourish on the end. And this kid looked at it like that, and he walked about 2 yards away, and then he just rubbed it out. So I don't think I've ever been on the same autograph sheet as Mike Brearley. But going back to the idea of talking about the game, what I learnt the most about cricket was from Mike, because I played under him for 3 years for Middlesex when he was England captain as well, and he was just prepared to listen to people, as well as being England captain and knowing exactly what should happen and being very decisive. He was also prepared to listen to others, even me, age 20. He might ask my opinion about what to do, and I thought I learnt more from him and from the way he approached the game and the way he led than any other cricketer I've ever played with or played against. In fact, in a way, he was the source of the idea of the analyst, because, you know, the depth and the detail that he went into the game really rubbed off on me, and I was able to sort of pass some of that stuff on. So Mike is probably the deepest and most interesting thinker about cricket that there has been, certainly in England. So you should all be very privileged that he's come back to his old club to open the Pavilion today, and congratulations on such a fantastic support and such an amazing club that you've been able to stump up the amounts and the funds and the resources, and that you're putting so much into the game, because the game needs all of you. So thank you very much.
Well, that concludes the formal part of the occasion. The pavilion is now open to be inspected. Don't make any dirty marks on the carpet. And we will be adjourning, guests will be adjourning over to the main clubhouse for some refreshments. Thank you very much.